Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube, back with more Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound for the read along, episode 817 with David's life in the balance. Over 2 centuries, Quentin learns that he lacks the one thing Pitofe is determined to master time. David Collins, David Hennessy. Petofe allows Quentin to visit Barnabas in his coffin and learns that the road to 1969 might be more challenging than he thought. Beth breaks from tending to David, now astrally trapped in Jameson's body, to serve Barnabas until Petofe shows her a vision of her vampiric future. Somewhere in the wilderness, as seen on a back lot, please, Robert Bly, put away the drum and step away from the fire with that drink. Who can see it's a Posy Cafe in a Yeti mug? Anyway, no one's impressed. Sure, we all think it's mead. Now, please go away before Paul Elam hears us and wakes up, sorry. So, yes, we're going to talk about manlines, as is my wont, but not your kind. We shall have no deep feelings shared, nor bonding acknowledged thank you, because that's all a bit much. Manhood is the opposite of flatulence. He who doesn't smell it is most certainly incapable of having dealt it. Go back and read that in Count Potofe's voice. Yes, you hear the music too. Manhood, whatever that means, this really is a core reason why I love Dark Shadows. Wallace and I have been in the midst of assembling the daybook book in fits and starts, and I frequently innuate him with new title ideas. Today's question, how to love Dark Shadows. More accurately, it might be why I love Dark Shadows. Episode 817 is a good place to start. As Wallace once wrote, Dark Shadows doesn't tell a story, it accumulates one. If there is any real reason to the show, it's ours, the viewers. Dark Shadows is a tough show to watch. It's an even tougher show to get. It takes time away from our lives, yet it becomes a genuine companion, ever changing, and we can't help it but change by it. So, what is it? This Dark Shadows? You know the answer. It's okay, we're amongst friends. Dark Shadows is Barnabas Collins, thus transitively speaking, he is what changes us. Knowing him, watching the arc of his second life, maybe even his samsara, feeling the pressure to make decisions burst into full-on choice, this daily immersion slowly wears away the import of our world and replaces it with his. 817 is so beautifully resonant because it lets us step back and look at Barnabas and Quentin as the pure friends we always wanted them to be. Every Gilgamesh needs an Enkidu. That was a lesson in manhood for me when I first saw it. These sins, if they are to have value, must be unexamined. They can only be acknowledged through silence. Ergo, I must write an essay about it. What's more, Dark Shadows lets us ponder the power of the soap opera format to build that friendship in real time. From a place of intense distrust, its success both sneaks up on us and seems like the most natural thing in the underworld. Quentin approaches Barnabas in the coffin, and the respect and affection they share are effortless. David Selby does most of the heavy lifting in the scene. It's some of his best work. It's so relaxed, attentive, focused, and authentically kind. In the midst of a ludicrous situation which sneezes squarely in the soap of write what you know, he is like the very real stone in a Zen sand garden. Later, when Quentin compares notes with Beth, also having returned from Batofe's, their conversation about the supernatural is stunningly casual yet intense. They are beyond romance and beyond the bodice ripening hullabaloo that encapsulates how we met them. They are maybe friends, but colleagues in wartime. First, my How Things Have Changed in 4 months, and who was the agent of those changes? Barnabas. By action and by example, goes from being a stranger in his own hometown to the Jackie Daytona that everyone needs but never knew it. But Beth needs a concerned mentor with no ulterior motives. Quentin needs a literally Edwardian hand of structure with no judgment. Selby's Quentin is increasingly aware that no matter how much Barnabas divulges about the future, there is something darker that he's not being told. A few months ago, Quentin would have seized on the existence of such a secret. Now we get the sense that he's somewhat relieved at being sheltered from it. It's a world all too eager to talk about ugly truths, and as 1897 goes on, it does so with less comical hysteria and more witful acceptance. This is an episode where a 12-year-old boy asks a woman what it feels like to die. They've been awakened from their sleep by Barnabas Collins, and so have we. Dark Shadows for once talks about what matters at the most primal level. How the ritual changes us. Its characters become us and we become the characters. Down to Beth watching herself becoming a vampire on a suspiciously television-like box in Batofe's chambers. It's the only show that matters. When Count Batofe appropriates Charles' studio for a clandestine rendezvous with Edward, Charles is puzzled to learn that a beautiful portrait of Amanda Harris might ruin the mood. Batofe, there, David. Sorry, I meant to say we're now on episode 834. Charles Tate discovers the secret of his own power, and Batofe monopolizes his home to meet Edward and expose his knowledge of Barnabas as the vampire. Barnabas ventures forward in time via the I Ching to interview Quentin's ghost about how he died. Nothing defines swagger like Jonathan Frid, Thayer David, Grayson Hall, and Lewis Edmonds. And 1834's I Ching wands glistened with a palpable mist of their testosterone. I have no idea how a show like this, with an episode like this, could be called a soap opera. Supernatural drama is more like it. Or maybe just Dark Shadows. Because at this point it defines itself. The swagger begins with Roger Davis and a bit before. The writer's swagger, having established Charles Delaware Tate as the most powerful being in the universe, I would say more powerful even than Batofe. If the Count were that powerful, he would have given the abilities to himself. Tate is the perfect man for the job, however, because he is one of the people in the Dark Shadows universe least likely to want it. If Petofi has to choose a vessel for the power, let it be Tate. Roger Davis responds to the task with his most cerebral performance on the show. Most Davis characters are situational pugilists, dealing with very direct conflicts with high stakes and little time. Tate, however, is a man saddled with the ultimate existential realization of his chosen profession, art. It's safe to live by manifestation, imagination, if that manifestation is only two-dimensional. But the responsibility that he realizes here is beyond the infinity. Can he change a math equation? Would that make buildings rise or fall? Can he change the shape of a continent or element the stars with a splash of black paint? He is experiencing the ultimate liberation of an artist or the ultimate prohibition. Roger Davis captures his complexity with the deliberate economy of a Go master. No small feat. Petofi, of course, is living swagger, forging names and appropriating art studios to trap Edward. Edward returns the swag by both embracing the dismission bohemian and then staying even after he realizes it's a trap. It's a perfect embodiment of mechanized Victorian thinking and properly. When his worst enemy, Count Petofi, drops a dime on Barnabas, Edward should suspect that something is up. But Edward thinks like a reptile, with only a few up and down switches that give him a very limited models of very binary thinking. That only enhances his confrontation with the former Fen Given, because Petofi is nothing but operational contradictions. Best of all, in this, is Barnabas, because he doesn't have the power. Cosmic, he's not the living embodiment of Victorian ideology. Early in the episode, he realizes that he must figure out how Quentin is going to die and how to stop it. Fred's own actor's terror here comes to the rescue. As always, it gives him a marvelously petrified millisecond of indecisive horror. Unlike any other TV hero of the era, he's not a master detective. Barnabas Collins is largely the master of finding himself in the wrong place at the wrong time, making him more akin to the heroes of Easy Rider and Little Big Man than Mannix. Nevertheless, he must summon the inner Mannix and solve the problem in the most ludicrous way possible by projecting his soul temporarily through the time to his awaiting body so that he can chat with a lethal ghost who never talked, get him to discuss his own death, and then return to 1897 with the news. Its ridiculous anti-thinking tantamount to solving a Rubik's Cube by switching around the stickers. It smacks of desperation. It works. Desperation burns his strange willpower, and Barnabas may not be a master detective, but he's no slouch at risking everything on insane ventures. It's one of the benefits of being a living corpse who suffered every conceivable tragedy. The schemes he executes, especially in this era, work because of sheer chazapah and the bravery one can only achieve through abject terror. At this point, the audience isn't tuning in to feel afraid, but rather to see what someone else can do when fear is all they know, and fear for the right reasons. Excuse me. This episode hit the airwaves September 4th, 1969. Episode 482. Count Petofi and Angelique face the one force no occult power can overcome. But what could it be? Julia Hoffman, Grayson Hall. Julia realizes that her force of will can not only propel her through time, but make her immune to the machinations of Count Beethoven. Serving a point-blank shot, she responds by recruiting Angelique to best the Count. Later, Charles Delaware Tate fully understands the extent of his powers by creating life from art. The dark shadows that I want, the dark shadows I remember, and the dark shadows I get are three distinct different shows. I want an Edward Albee version of Doc Savage with vampires, and no one is sensible enough to make that. The Dark Shadows I Remember is an endlessly engaging, unfinished sympathy of surprise as Barnabas wanders toward episodes that I was told were too expensive to show. The Dark Shadows I Get is a sustained note of comforting monotony spiked with fleeting moments of delight and wonder. There are moments when I shout to no one, red alert. There's the imagination and delight and risk. When Dark Shadows is good, I mean very good, it crisscrosses the best of American character drama with tales of profound, speculative fantasy. It can be the equal of great theater and exceeds the brainiest science fiction. I say things like that, but when it comes to proving it, I'm often perfect. I usually have to tell people that, there are 1,225 episodes, and if you just watch it, that will appear. Like some kind of theatrical magic eye poster, and I could never do those. It's perverse to ask it of others, which of course I love doing. Still, the pleasure of writing the daybook is to become Khan in the Matra sector, bolting from his chair and announcing, there she is, at 842, needs to hop up on a pedestal and pose for the moment, because, well, there she is. It may be all of that, or it may be all of that only in the context of the other 1,224 installments. I'm not sure that anything in Dark Shadows is what I'd like it to be. Is anything a self-contained example of itself? You simply have to judge for yourself after watching it, and if you do that, by the end, even the most die-hard critic of the show is at least seen it. Does it amount to anything? Not my problem. But it's not a payoff episode in terms of resolving storylines, but it nevertheless answers questions the show has begged, which is a horror no-no, and depicts characters actually talking about their relationships, aspirations, and surprises. A secret to acting is that a performer can build a career on making decisions, discoveries, and disclosures. Taking a note from that 842 propels itself with a marvelously satisfying sequence of all three. It may never top its beginning, as Julia suffers a fatal bullet wound from a diabolical trap set by Beethoven to force Barnabas to be her unwitting murderer. Such inventive sadism in a Republic surreal. It all could have been resolved with some kind of chat that no one matched the setup. But Gordon Russell is too crafty for that. Why cheat when you can explore the existential extent of your own wackadoodle time travel conceit? That's what they do. And in doing so, the show uses its exhausting length to investigate all of those bizarre implications. No other medium could afford time travel through a chain trance. It is patiently silly, unlike the dignity of a flux capacitor or vibrating equalizer, until you really explore it to such an extent that is somehow legitimizes itself. Julia is there, but only through the force of her that symbolizes the spirit with which these characters soldier on through 950 hours of contrived terror and unlikely romance. These characters keep trudging on because they have to. Like we do in life. And Julia, more human than any of them, summons a friendship that dwarfs love and simply goes there. In doing so, she is a woman beyond time and may be the most powerful character in the Dark Shadows universe. Moving among cursed titans of cosmic powers and mortality, she is more immortal than any of them, immune even to the powers of the great Ptolemy. Now she is a god, and instead of being driven mad with power, she represents all of us base creatures of limited time and matter by doing her frickin' job. Finally, one of us is thrust into the fray, and she spends her time finally talking sense to these giants, getting them on the same team, pointing out that there are stakes beyond what they want in the impulsive right now, and she gets Angelique. Angelique on the side of truth, justice in the Collinsport way. That's how youth trash curses and send sorcerers running. That's how you mix it up with monsters. Faulkner declined to accept the end of man, and when I see Julia Hoffman straighten her spine and go to work, I understand why. That's why Dark Shadows matters. This episode was broadcast September 16th, 1969, episode 856. When Quentin awakens in Ptolemy's body, will Magda think to pry him out in time? Quentin, there, David. Ptolemy switches bodies with Quentin to travel through time, and Quentin is unable to convince Magda and Beth that he is not the Count. We've seen it before, the old Ptolemy body switcheroo. First Jameson, just for a laugh, and then Quentin to travel in time, in at least two places, the other being when Angelique makes a shadow decoy in the mirror to fool Laura. The writers have the confidence and savvy, or maybe luck, to set up secondary payoffs to what seem like small story mechanics and surprise us. 1897 is such a generous storyline that we get these seeds planted not just weeks, but entire meteorological seasons in advance in this case. It leads to two of the most interesting performances on the series and sheds light on the pluses and minuses of the characterization of Quentin Collins. As Ben Stokes, there David blended strength and vulnerability with surprise and nuance as Quentin Collins. Trapped in Ptolemy's body, David adds another layer to the alternating realizations of advantage and provision intelligence. Quentin is a bright man used to being in control of his immediate circumstances. If the 1897 storyline is about Quentin growing up, literally going from ghost to man, then to do so when deprived of his family talents, he goes to rely on underdeveloped strengths. Is Quentin intelligent? Yes, quite so. He is perhaps not as academically advanced as Barnabas, but he excels at observation and processing, which are not always his vampire cousin's strengths. Do we see this? Up to now, not as much as we should. Quentin has height, looks, and limitless charm, on which he can rely on to get him out of most problems. Not only are these muscles stronger than his mind, they usually lead to results that are a lot more fun. Well, that fun is Ptolemy's to be had as he kidnaps Quentin's body and sticks our hero in the family truckster. As the storyline goes on, Quentin's evolution is clear. The character haunted by Ptolemy terrorist actions within his shape, learning of the privilege he took for granted, and honing his humanity by relying on contemplativeness and compassion in the place of sex appeal. Never before or since has a character on Dark Shadows evolved so thoroughly, believably, and dramatically. He is cursed by the gods on a level that goes beyond Shakespearean and into the atmospheres of the ancient Greeks. Quentin is a man who has everything, ignores that fact, and instead lusts for everything he doesn't need. If his stint as the packless wolf began the lesson, this seals it. Heightening this with both a wild theatrically and a strange subtlety is David Selby's performance as Count Petofe. I was about to write that he makes a marvelous Bond villain, showing us who Quentin would have been if the writers hadn't cared about making him anything other than a total black-hearted bastard. As those guys go, this is one of the most charismatic portrayals I've seen on screen, great and small. Then it struck me, I know what Selby's doing, accidentally or not. He's showing us the man Quentin would have been in middle age, if he had learned none of the lessons forced on him by fate and the writer's room. This Petophazized version of Quentin has everything he could ever wanted, and is revolutionarily smug about it. The sickening truth is that absolute power cannot corrupt the already corrupted. It just serves as an admirably complement in the moral balance. The real Quentin's lesson is even more haunting. He is humbled, he learns, he becomes a better man, and perhaps as such, he is alone and empty for nearly a century. I say that passing no more judgment on it than does the show. It is simply a fact for him. Virtue is no guarantee of joy, and there is no ruder awakening for a man like Quentin Collins than vice has lost its luster as well. He becomes twice the moralist to his brother that his brother is, a fraction as happy and unable to go back once he's seen there's a better way to treat the world. And we wonder why he goes mad. This episode hit the airwaves October 6, 1969. Episode 871. As Angelique explains how she made Barnabas a new man, Charles Delaware Tate reluctantly shows Count Petofe the proper way to 1969. Count Petofe, David Selby. Kitty Soames manifests the spirit of Josette to such an extent that she and Barnabas seem nearly reunited, and it feels so good. Perhaps Barnabas understood, but what that Angelique explains when she tells Quentin how she faked Barnabas' staking by creating a duplicate of him while she cursed the other of her own curse. Meanwhile, Petofe forces Charles Delaware Tate to throw the I Ching wands, and the 49th hexagram at last appears, taking the artist into visions of 1969. Petofe now knows how to transport himself there, and he roars with triumphant anticipation of his destiny in the future. 871 makes me appreciate just how elaborate Dark Shadows actually is. It also makes me wish the rest of the show were more like 871. This is not one frame of subtlety to be found. Even if the line deliberately is occasionally muted, the writing is not good, and it makes me appreciate Sam Hall and Gordon Russell all the more. The episode's writer, Violet Wells, was their amanuensis. Barnabas taught me that word, and by just inhaling the creative fumes coming off their conversations and creations, she may be the show's best writer and secret weapon. And she doesn't have time for nuance. Sometimes God, love 'em, Sam and Gordon had their other characters in prior episodes suck the wind out of the series with talk, talk, talk. That's what happens when you fill 10 weeks of programming with 10 hours of actual plot, because perhaps she had fewer shots at being produced. Violet Wells is a writer who's got a lot to accomplish. Thank you, and if anyone opens their mouth around here, it had better be to advance the plot or finally explain what in Sam Hall is going on over at the old mill at this time of night. This episode is almost all pay off. Sam and Gordon were wrapping up 1897. Show's finest hours of entertainment and imagination with a length of nearly 175 episodes. That's almost the duration of the entire series before Barnabas was introduced. They and the other writers must have been led staggering out of their office to this day off. I can see interns putting little caps capes on them like James Brown's pit crew, helping the equally spent legend off stage at the end of a concert. They were probably led to typewriters elsewhere to keep working on House of Dark Shadows' latest draft. This isn't the last episode of 1897, but it's awfully close. Might as well be. Violet's assignment must have been a bittersweet compliment to get that far, and then hand it over to someone else. Was there envy, pride for a colleague, relief? All of those things are probably too interesting. It was probably just business. It's very easy to gaze at art on a deeper level than the art ever did. Theater, I was told, is art. Television is a piece of furniture. This was a truism within the TV business itself for Sam, Gordon, and company. It was more likely another day at a good gig, one that fans liked far more than they did. And how can we not with 871? It begins by rooting us in the core mythos and giving our hero what he's wanted since we met Josette. Yes, okay, she's supposed to marry Edward, but well, Edward's no Jeremiah. And yes, she's having flash forwards to being Kitty again. That's pork chops and applesauce compared to the berries that Barnabas has faced before, including sending his soul backward by nearly a century to be intentionally trapped in a sealed coffin. But even the few lines of happiness we see are an emotional banquet. We've wanted for nearly 500 episodes. Barnabas isn't the only one who has been waiting. The big news follows right after, which is a narrative of how Angelique both cursed Barnabas of vampirism and arranged for him to be staked without causing him actual harm. It's a monologue montage that deserves a Lalo Schifrin score, and Laura Parker walks away with it. Usually for Dark Shadows, it includes flashback pieces featuring the actors who are themselves in the narration. Normally, DS talks us behind the magician's curtain, takes us behind the magician's curtain very early on. We're on Team Monster. In this case, we've been sitting in the audience with the rest of Collinsburg. It's a wackadoodle plan involving a doppelganger created by doubling Barnabas in a mirror, literally through the looking glass. It's a nutso piece of fantasy fluff, but it works because Laura Parker sells it with her trademark passionate sincerity. That and when I hear new age people who pitch the woo to me, their descriptions of what they do are always vague. When I ask them to break it down, they castigate me for expecting something like a scrying mirror to behave like a household appliance. Gee, shoo. Somehow the dreamlike logic of Angelique's plan makes as much, if not more sense. It's like something narrated by my subconscious as I slip into sleep, and as a sense of realism that is undeniably true because it makes a very specific type of credible nonsense. That, and it's a technique they used on Laura Collins months earlier, given its verisimilitude without letting us know it's Chekhov's doppelganger. It's a strangely cruel plan. I'm never confident about the peaceful passing of a state double, and every time I watch The Prestige, the great Dayton's cruel sacrifice reminds me of this. No wonder Barnabas is relatively unfazed by things like this upcoming trip to 1796. At this point, he's been several types of dead, and that's his least troublesome set of experiences of late. This is only in the first half of the episode, mind you. Portofe has had it with hanging around Collinwood. The old meal is clammy. It's fun to be David Selby, and the future awaits. When he gets Delaware Tate to throw the wands, he gets instant results as to which way to 1969. It's amazing what a competent stooge can accomplish. After suffering years bungling incompetence, just ask Barnabas after he put Carolyn on the staff, in an episode where Barnabas experiences the most romantic fulfillment he's had in three timelines, and Angelique describes the most amazing occult caper in Dark Shadows history. Leave it to David Selby to walk away with the ending as Tofi, future bound and claiming that nothing will stop him. Selby brings a maniacally grand sense of emotional oomph that makes the ring cycle feel as important as the chicken tonight jingle. There are moments in drama, so let's face it, shamelessly overwrought, they cannot be resisted, only embraced. Most mortal actors would have mugged their way through it, or shamed insincerity, bellowing to just get it over with. But Selby is a poet with a native sense of integrity and wonder. His loyalty to storytelling is great too, and too real. And he nails the unadulterated joy of pure evil with a zestful energy I've rarely seen. And that important, he is living, he is a living Marvel comic book. Reason, emotion, and passion completely bound together. And to the credit of both Selby and the originator of the role, we somehow feel that if Thayer David is upstage on this particular stage, it is a spiritual collaboration of beautiful and perfect unity. Excuse me. These men were as opposite as Trilon and Perseer, and in Calpatofe, with the tight poetry of Violet Wells, there is suddenly no difference at all. This episode hit the airwaves October 27th, 1969. Episode 885. When Barnabas finds himself back in the 1970s, can he turn his great defeat into victory? Barnabas Collins, Jonathan Fruit. As Kitty vanishes into a portrait of Josette, Barnabas loses consciousness and awakens in 1795 on the eve of Josette's suicide. He is determined to change history, confronting Angelique with honesty and compassionate plea for mercy. She betrays him yet again and shows Josette a vision of herself as a vampire high atop Widow's Hill. I used to think that was all about Judah Zachary. It's vaguely convenient to imagine him puppet mastering the whole thing to emotionally disseminate the Collins family. Decimate. As Saint Ming would say, he likes to play with things a little before annihilation. The Zachary Codex is awfully eloquent, and it makes for some USDA prime smartly potassium. The longer I am with Dark Shadows, the more comfortable I am with saying that these grand theories are just those. Maybe they are accurate, certainly. If it helps you read the show, then subscribe to them. By all means, subscribe to enough of them, and then McMahon may show up with a check. Let's hope so. It's not his bar tab. By the way, I miss entertain. Is it the 70s again? I'm ready for it to be 70s again. The 70s again. However, just because a grand theory works for a lot of things, it doesn't mean that it explains everything. The moral arc taken by Barnabas could be seen as his torture, but it's spectacularly risky and unsuccessfully one. After all, although it is emotional ruins, it leads to his ultimate success as an ethical man. It could be that some other source is influencing the narrative. For a long time, I couldn't really figure out who it was. Now I do. Sarah. Just because she's a child doesn't mean that she lacks the ability of gumption to manipulate as many spectral workings as possible. Perhaps this entire story is a constant of will between the two of them, because when properly motivated, there are few things more unstoppable than a determined kid. What would motivate Sarah to take on Judah Zachary? Well, this one-time protege, Angelique, may have strayed from her master, but he still trained her. Imagine that you die and suddenly see the full narrative that drove your life and demise. Not only that, but if Sarah thought his student was bad news, the teacher was practically nuisance. But in death, Sarah realized that she has a living agent, which is more than that can be said for most of the regulars on the Love Boat. Her red right hand to punish Judah is her immortal brother. She knows Barnabas' strengths, and more than that, she knows his failings. She knows that he is a raw element that must be tampered and honed before he can be properly deployed in battle. And as with someone who takes on transforming pooping fresh from an unbaked doughboy into a rock-hard brick of weaponized Melba toast, ready to scrape the roof of evil's mouth, there will be pain. And it could be a combination of those things. With Judah, becoming increasingly aware of his inconvenient vampire and his tough, grizzled 8-year-old girl of a ringside Burgess Meredith, he puts more and more obstacles in the path. Look at episode 855. It might be the result of the manipulation of Sarah, or it might be the result of the manipulation of Judah Zachary. Or it could be the two of them going at it. Maybe Judah rips Josette into the past and Sarah sends Barnabas after her. Or perhaps Sarah has set the whole thing up to test her brother's character. The episode is a hidden treasure. Soon the series will turn into a sequence of hidden treasures. Every episode will be a reward for having watched all of the others, but right now this exists like the time trap sequence around the 660s. It's a seemingly superfluous gift that exists more as an example of the show's hell-zip-popping exuberance than as a piece of mechanical storytelling necessity. It feels like it's their way of saying, and here's a special something for being a loyal viewer. After all, the show doesn't exactly specialize in 2 or 3 episodes of very special events. We've been trained to expect this kind of sidetrack to last for months. In fact, Dark Shadows is the only show I know of where the special sequences contain fewer episodes than the average storyline rather than more. At this point, they don't even really bother with a time travel mechanism Basically, don't stand too close to a portrait of Josette while there's a fire going in the fireplace. Similarly, don't look at someone who is standing too close to a portrait of Josette where there's a fire going in the fireplace. It's just science. And that's not what you came here for. But if it is, give me a minute and I'll put on a lab coat and Dr. Len's surgical chaps. Still, this is the part of the plot of the overall series. And if you want the benefits of any kind of overarching story themes, you have to put on the apron with me. Grab a hammer and bang away at these things. In the retaliation forge, the fact that there is no seeming time travel mechanism. It is the entire point. It's a wonderful mystery that invests us in interpretation the story. If we realize that part of the Leviathan's plan is to both put the whammy on Barnabas and hold and let him see, if I remember this correctly, the ghost of Josette as hostage as a backup, then perhaps this was orchestrated by them to remind Barnabas of the intensity of his feelings for her. Maybe it was Sarah's doing to remind Barnabas of the stakes underlining his ongoing crusades. Or, Judas Acker, because it's pretty convenient to blame him for everything from the destruction of Collinwood in 1970 to some sort of sweaters they made David Hennessy wore toward the end of the series. It's an immensely gratifying episode. It's almost like seeing Barnabas at his high school reunion, vowing to undo everything he did to the bathroom stall in the science building when he was a sophomore. It's one of the most authentic examples the series gives us of his evolution. Literally a side-by-side portrait, of someone of the sides is hundreds of episodes prior. He is making the decision we wanted to see him make in the first place. He is making decisions that we suspected he was capable of back then and now. It's Barnabas at his most tender and heroic. When he tells Angelique that he can only give her his gratitude, he is being honest by 1840. That would be enough for her. So, in a sense, it is as much of a trial for her as it is for him. His mistake is in seeing her as a woman who saved his life in 1897. Yes, people can change, but not yet. This moment of her embittered selfishness doesn't make us hate her as much as it makes us pity her. And it adds a depth to the ultimate forgiveness that she will show him in their final voyage. As he made plans with Kitty in 1897, we have never seen him happier or more confident or more fulfilled. This adds a harrowing context to the personal turn toward a larger evil that he will take in the next few episodes. So why? Why do they do this to him? If not the characters in the series, then the actual people making it. Every time I think I know every kind of crazy there is, I meet an entirely new kind of crazy. And that's how we learn for Barnabas. A man with a tenuous relationship with reality, and at best, every time he thinks that the universe is finally reflecting his opinion of what it should be, it'll pile drive him into reality. And he must climb the steps of Mount Morality once again. But he is not a video game character, continually leveling up. If the real subtitle of the show is the continuing education of Barnabas Collins, his cycle of ethical awareness followed by cynical downfalls gives him greater and more nuanced understandings of humanity with each turn, because it's not just his story, it's our story as we venture out of the idealism of the Enlightenment and into being enlightened. The difference finally reveals itself in 1840, up to the fall. We are about to see his heroism as being driven toward redressing who he was in the past, trying to bring modern world into alignment with the aspirations of his era of origin. Everything he does is about repairing the past because the past is safe. The past is a known quantity. What he has yet to attempt is building a bridge toward the future unknown. That's what his final arc. After this and after the Leviathans will teach him to do, it's based more on accepting what is rather than what should be and guiding that with a courage that comes from saying, I don't know, because to say that requires Barnes to let go of his greatest fear, himself. And he does, and good for him. And I would like to think good for Sarah. This episode was broadcast November 4th, 1969. Okay, guys, that's the end of chapter 4. I think what I did was, and I'm not sure, was I accidentally read chapter 4 and 5 and called it chapter 4. But if I did, I apologize. But I do think that this here, what I'm about to get into, is chapter 5. All right, guys, I'm going to stop right there. I am getting ready to start chapter 5. You guys have a great day. I am on 1970, Dark Night of the Soul. This is really, really good. Great, really, really, it is so great written. I'm really enjoying this. I love the essays that Patrick has put in this one. It's so much more in depth than the last one. I'm not calling the last one inferior. I just really like the Dark Shadows Daybook Unbound that much. It's really a fun read. I hope you guys go pick this up. Link's going to be in the description box. You guys have a good day. See you later. Bye-bye.